Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Russell Boyce and Kevin Graham. Welcome back to the Axon Bulletin, gentlemen. How are you?
Yes, good mate, good. It's been a less eventful weekend than normal for a Monday show, Paul, so at least I'm not going to be getting any hate mail this week, I'm telling you.
I hope you don't get hate mail, Russell. I know someone who does, and that's your co-host Kevin Graham. He gets plenty. Kevin, we're back. Obviously, as Russell said, there are no games over the weekend for Celtic. We have fallen behind again. 23 points now is the deficit. Obviously, we've got a couple of games coming up on Wednesday night where Celtic will be facing Hamilton. Akis, we opened the season up, Kevin, with a convincing victory against Hamilton, and I remember you took a wee bit of stick because you weren't overly impressed with that. You weren't overly impressed with the first half performance against Ross County when we battered them 5-0 away. Can you see Celtic, beyond everything else that we're going to discuss today in relation to transfers and managers and structural change, do you see us being able to go out on Wednesday and get a result? I mean, we've had a terrible month there. We've not had a win this month.
You've got to believe that we can, but I think the problem that we've got is, I mean, we're in a state of flux, we're in a state of confusion with regards to the future of the club, future of the manager. So the players are probably going to be the same. I find it extremely difficult to believe that the players would be able to block out the noise that's going on round about the club at the moment. They're probably just as unsure as us. I mean, look, we're unsure, but it's their livelihoods. They don't know what's going to be happening over the next couple of months. They don't know who's going to be their manager next season, what structure they're going to be playing under next season. You've also got the COVID worry as well. I mean, it's looking at increasingly likely that you're struggling to get fans back into the stadium this year. Never mind before the end of the season. So they might be worrying about pay cuts, and yes, people will go, they earn enough money, but they live a lifestyle of compared to the money that they earn. So they still will. There will be some of them still have money worries in that. So it's a confusing time for them, and maybe getting out on a football park will give them a bit of respite and let them do what they should be good at, which is scoring goals and winning games. Hopefully, now that the majority of the squad have been back a week, that we'll be able to get a result and a decent performance. Maybe just a result, or maybe just pin my hat on a result rather than a decent performance, because we haven't seen one of them probably since this point last year.
It is a frustration. I mean, Russell, obviously it would be fantastic for us to be sitting here looking back on the last game, looking ahead to the next one, but there's so much more to the world at Celtic at this moment in time. Are you able to at any point switch off from the noise, as Kevin describes, and have a look forward to the game of football that we'll be watching on Wednesday, or that almost becomes a sideshow?
Paul, I think you've just hit the nail on the head there. I'll be honest here, I think with the way it's coming to the games now, there's a lot of reasons why they're not taking sort of precedence, which is such a sin, because I mean the whole reason that we support Celtic in the first place is our love of the actual sport. That's what triggers the whole falling in love with the club and all that. I actually happen to think that right now, though, with all the sideshows that are going on, or you could say lack of sideshow at times, because there's been a strange silence since the last time I was on from the board again. I think that does take up almost 99.9% of your thinking. And the fact that what you are watching on the pitch as well isn't really up to much, as Kev's sort of alluding to, also makes it easier not to be focusing on that aspect as much. But what's happening off the club right now? The silence is deafening, like you said last week as well. And I really don't know what the script is here. And also, usually in January you'd be thinking one of the reasons you're a wee bit more distracted from the footballing side of things is the transfer window, but of course that's been absolutely that's been null and void as well.
Absolutely. I mean, Kevin, we had a very interesting discussion over the weekend on the Bulletin, and we were talking about days gone by where I'm trying to pull some kind of comparison between the pre-season we're going to enter after this season being similar to the one post Dalglish and Barnes. And what I mean by that is the level of investment as much as anything. And because, I mean, you look at the situation we have at the moment, you've got the 4 core staff, manager, coaching staff. So you've got Lenny, Strachan, Kennedy and Stevie Woods. If there is a change like there was back in the time of Barnes, you've got 4 payoffs. Because back then it was Dalglish, Barnes, McDermott and Eric Black. So that's massive. And then obviously you've got the new manager and management team, stroke coaching team coming in. If you're going to employ someone who isn't unemployed, you've then got the matter of compensation to pay as well. So it's a double whammy. So you could have, the equivalent of 8 payouts just to get a new management team in. How do you think that is influencing any decisions that are being made at Celtic at the moment, Kevin, during the issues that we have financially because of the COVID?
It's got to, because nobody can really predict what's going to happen. I bang on about this all the time, but how can they sell season tickets for next year knowing full well that supporters are not going to be in the ground? It's not like this season where they basically sold them on the intention, we'll be back by September, we'll be back by October, we'll be back by the Rangers game on the 28th of October. That's no longer going to sell. It's not going to sell to the vast majority of the support. So how do you sell that? Because I can get a stream and watch the majority of the games. I don't need to spend £600. And truthfully, there'll be a lot of people out there who can't afford to throw £600 to watch a stream. Not anymore. So the income of the club is going to be under serious. The income of the whole football enterprise is going to be under consideration for people going into next season. Our main investment over the summer should be a new coaching staff. And if that's only investment that we get, then that's only investment that we're going to get. There is going to be players leaving. There might even be players leaving over the next, I think it's to the 5th of February as the transfer window closes. Now it's not the end of January. But the market seems dead. There doesn't seem to be anything happening. When you watch a certain sports channel rolling news, there doesn't seem to be any big transfers going to happen. And I think that's a sign of clubs tightening their belts, because they don't know what's going to happen in the next 6-7 months. And that's got to be a consideration for the club stepping forward. But it shouldn't be the only consideration. We have a major shareholder with deep pockets. And if we've got to take a loan, I know we're not going to go into debt. I know the way that the club's run, and I'm quite happy the club's run that way. But we need a major investment in the management and the coaching side. And that has to be top priority.
Now, again, that puts you in a position, Kevin, whereby that management stroke coaching team will want to know about budgets. They'll want to know about signing targets. Now, I think just about everybody who's been on the Bulletin over the last couple of weeks have said, well, you know what, we do have a strong squad. That squad didn't become poor overnight. There's loads of other circumstances that are contributing to that. So a manager coming in will be able to identify that, yeah, there's a core of players there, but regardless, they want to add some players themselves. So, I mean, again, we're in a bit of a catch-22 then, Kev, because you won't be able to get the best candidate if you don't have this bounty of, a signing budget as well.
I mean, you look at O'Neill. O'Neill's main signing was Chris Sutton, who was basically paid for by Mark Viduka. Mark Viduka went to Leeds. You look at the rebuild Neil Lennon done after Tony Mowbray. That was basically built by selling Aidan McGeady to Spartak Moscow. It'll happen again. But just this time you'll maybe have 4 or 5 players leaving to fund. You'll have 4 or 5 players leaving to fund the rebuild. But the majority of that should be actually spent on the coaching staff, because I do reckon that we've still got decent enough ingredients there to actually have a decent side. We just need pointed in the right direction, developed in the right direction. So there is a bit of healing and dealing to be done, and I reckon that'll need to be done, and hopefully it's done by a new CEO.
Well, we'll come back to that as well, Kevin, because that is part of the wider structural issues at Celtic. Russell, we're talking about how the current pandemic is possibly influencing the lack of decision-making at Celtic. It isn't influencing the lack of decision-making elsewhere, because obviously the breaking news today is that Lampard's out and Chelsea already have someone lined up to take over. Lampard was in charge of Chelsea last night when they beat Luton, but, you know, they're not messing about this morning. They're getting everything sorted out and they're doing it efficiently. So it's not the case across the board, but certainly at Celtic you're looking at perhaps the financial element of getting rid of a coaching staff, bringing in a new one. How big of an element is the fact that we're not there? We're not at the games. There isn't 60,000 of a support calling for change, or the vast majority of them calling for change during the games, at full time of the games, outside the stadium, because I think all of these things would have been a regular occurrence this season. Yeah. How big an impact has the lack of fans had on the lack of action at Celtic?
Well, I think if that is the case, what you're saying, and that was to be such a big factor in the decision-making process at board level, then they wouldn't be fit for purpose, I'm afraid, because that has to be a mitigating factor when you're hearing the influence of the fans and the noise that they're making. But surely you have to have enough conviction in your own decision-making skills to make big calls when they're necessary, regardless of whether there's fans outside shouting or not. That should add weight to a current thought process you're already having. But I would like to think that the board has more about them than it just being dependent on the fans not being there. If that's the case, I'd be extremely concerned.
Kevin, you've obviously been involved in fan groups down the years, season ticket holder for as long as myself. When was it now, 94? First season ticket back in the day. In your opinion, if we were all in there, if the stadium was full to capacity in most home games, what do you think the reaction would be? I mean, I've seen good and bad reactions. You go further back, you go back to the last day of the season when was it Jimmy Gilmour scored the goal for Falkirk and they beat us 2-1 that day.
It's Jimmy Johnson's nephew, Jimmy Gilmour.
Yeah, absolutely. Is he related to the Gilmours from Coatbridge? Lead singer out the Silencers, Jinky Gilmour.
Oh, there might be a connection there. I couldn't 100% confirm that, but I'm sure somebody for Coatbridge might be able to confirm that. Possibly. And, you remember the scenes after that game with scarves getting thrown at players as they ran up the tunnel. We've seen protests outside the stadium. We've seen it this season. We've seen the protests outside the stadium this season. Do you think the fan influence this season would have been huge in any decision-making process? Because Russell makes a point there. It shouldn't really. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be nice for the suits sitting in the comfy seats watching this unfold. Maybe the fencing being erected, maybe there being a police presence as vehicles are being led out of the stadium. It wouldn't be nice. It would be uncomfortable for them. Do you think it would change anything in terms of the decision making and the speed in which they're making these decisions, Kevin? Of course you've got to believe it would. I mean, because after the protests against the Ross County games, and no matter if they were right or wrong, attacking the team bus is wrong. Bottom line, that is wrong. But seemingly the players were shocked at the reaction and the support. And I was thinking to myself, well, if the crowd were there, they wouldn't be shocked by the reaction. They would know how the crowd were feeling about the performances. I still put my overall general opinion on this is we wouldn't be in this position if fans were there. And I still really, really believe that. Either the change would be made or we would still be in the running. I really do believe that. And folk can call me stupid all they want, but I really do believe if fans were in the stadium we wouldn't be in this mess.
Remember last season, Kevin, 1 each against Hamilton. We were up, then we lost the goal after a long throw in. They threatened all day, didn't they? All night that they were going to score from a long throw in, and indeed they did. But of course Scott Brown scored in the dying embers of that game. And you look back on even games like that are maybe not famous games in the history of Celtic, but in terms of last season, when you're looking at a momentum and you're looking at that belief system of we're going to win this league, continuing from one game to the next, the fans do play a massive part in that. I mean, you could feel the lift, even when Hamilton equalised that night, you could feel the lift that the players were given by the fan reaction. You know, it's similar to, and I'll get onto him in a second, Lee Griffiths coming back to full fitness. This was last season, and every time he ran around the back of the goals and everybody stands up, do you think that gives Lee Griffiths a wee bit extra? Of course it does. Absolutely. Everybody to a man were standing up and applauding Lee Griffiths because he was going to come on as a sub. I think that gives him an extra few percent in his legs. I would say so.
Of course it does, and I'm not saying if the fans were there we wouldn't be as poor. What I'm actually saying, the reason that how many points we are behind Rangers is because of poor recruitment and poor management and poor coaching. Bottom line, that's it. But what I'm actually saying is some of the players who have lost a lot of the confidence, a lot of their self-confidence, would have that if the crowd were still there. You made the perfect example about Lee Griffiths. Maybe Barkas would be able to catch something or make a save if we had given him a traditional Celtic welcome. Maybe Ayeti would have been on fire because we were there encouraging them. We are generally an encouraging support. We generally are quite a level-headed support, and we don't get on the team's back as much as other supports in British football. And I think players have said that during the years. And we have been missed this season, definitely. And going for what we should have been going for this season, I think we would have carried that team at times. Maybe we'd still end up with the same result. Who knows? But I says at the AC Milan game when we went 2-1, when we went 2-1, I says, and you can go back and check the tape, I says if there's 50,000 Celtic fans in that stadium, that game's ending up 2 each that night. That is ending up 2 each that night.
You did say that, yeah.
I did say that. But then on the flip side, I go back to the Copenhagen game last year. I reckon the crowd caused us to lose that Copenhagen game because when we equalised, we done the shout, go forward, let's win this game before going into extra time, where the team should have actually took a big deep breath and went, no, we'll take this into extra time. So it can work both ways, but I would like to have seen us with the crowd there this season. I do believe, maybe it's misguided, but I do believe we would have made a difference.
Now, Russell, we're talking about obviously the impact or otherwise of the fans not being there, but again we are in a situation where it's simply not happened. The wheels have come off this season, and a big part of that, as Kevin quite rightly says, is the manager. There's other reasons: bad planning, coaching, recruitment, allowing this kind of, for me, an attitude to creep into all levels of the club, which, some quarters have called it arrogant. I just think it's certainly complacent. There's a complacency crept in. When you're looking at the manager and you're looking at what's happening down south, and I know it's a different ball game, I know that, but we look upon ourselves as a club of an elite status insofar as it can be elite in the Scottish game. Chelsea, they make a decision. They've got a man lined up. The job's done. The merry-go-round starts going round again in terms of management. I think even managers, in terms of, the actual reaction, Kevin, coming back to what you said there, how many managers have kept their job due to the fact that, clubs are looking at finances and saying, well, you plus all your coaching staff are going to cost this club several £1 million. Our first target's going to be this guy. That's going to cost us several million. How many clubs reluctant and maybe giving their coaches more time? Is that a factor in what Celtic are doing? I think it probably is. But when you look down south and you look at the merry-go-round, and as Kevin quite rightly says, some of the managers who have so far either been linked with Celtic or have been quoted on this podcast as being someone that we would like at Celtic, it's quite clear Celtic are not going to be in the running for people like Rafa Benitez or Ralph Rangnick when you're looking at the clubs that they are connected to, but also the fact that it would appear, and I find this absolutely astonishing, that a lot of the mainstream media channels that ran the Rafa Benitez story at the weekend were basing it on that fake letter, which is quite embarrassing. So, Russell, when you're looking at that, is it possible that the Celtic hierarchy are looking at the situation and thinking, we're just going to see the season out, the league's gone, We might or might not play in the Scottish Cup, never mind win it, due to the circumstances.
Yep.
We're just going to see this out, because if we maybe give Lennon notice, I don't know all the details of his contract, it's going to cost the club a lot less come the summer. It seems more and more likely with every passing day of nothing really on the Twitter page other than, on this day or birthdays, and in actual fact, the condolences to the family of Johannes Shuggy Edvaldsson, and we'll speak about Shuggy as well. God bless him, and obviously our thoughts and prayers are with his family. But other than that, we're getting nothing really tangible from the club. Does that make you think we're not doing anything? We're not trying to get in touch with the representatives of Eddie Howe. We certainly are not in discussions with Rafa Benitez, and in actual fact, we're not doing anything.
It's really concerning, because if that is the case, I mean, obviously, like I said a couple of weeks ago, the season ticket renewals comes out before the end of the season. So it's one hell of a risky strategy if they were to release, the renewal period comes up and there's been no change, and they expect movement there from the fans, because I don't think there's going to be nearly as many that bite on the basis that Neil Lennon's still in the manager. Or the only way that could work is if Neil Lennon's leaving at the end of the season and we're made aware of what the plan is going forward. But if they try and do it, like if you're suggesting, like perhaps they've not even approached the sort of high-profile candidates, we would like them to be in discussions with the likes of Benitez. I think you said before they did actually have a conversations with him before Neil Lennon got the job a couple of years back. I would be absolutely devastated if he's left his job in China. We're clearly going to have a new management team next season at the very latest, and we're not, trying to have conversations with the likes of him, the likes of Eddie Howe, who's a free agent as well. That, to me, is just shocking if it's not the case. However, you've got to admit, why would you delay it right now? What's the benefit to Celtic delaying right now? To me, the season has gone, unfortunately, in the league, and only further enhanced in the past sort of 4 games since the bye. We've not picked up a win, and you're thinking, we were screaming out for change before then. There was moments in the season, I think we've all alluded to it, the Ferencvaros moment, your Pataudry moment, the Ross County moment was mine. Do you know what I mean? I think you're looking at all these different examples. It's now got to the stage, it's so far past that. There is options out there. I think the Howe one will obviously be discussed at length last week, was quite obvious. Have they spoke to Eddie Howe? You are, as you say, with every passing day beginning to question that. And I just feel it's very risky to leave all of this to the end of the season. If renewals have been particularly slow, is that perhaps going to influence whether they push the boat out on the manager? Or if renewals are actually ticking along at the same sort of pace they normally are, does that mean they then go for your Jack Ross level manager and take their chances there? It's a very strange strategy. And like I've always said, the more they spend on a manager, the more revenue that club will generate. And I don't understand how that seems to be getting missed here. I think that is the most obvious thing with football clubs. The better the manager you've got, 9 times out of 10, the club will generate more money for having them there, because they'll sell on players that they've improved. They will get you into the Champions League more often than not, and they'll get you into finals, semi-finals with more TV revenue there as well.
You're also in a tournament summer, which means that nothing gets done until after the Euros will be finished.
That's a good point.
So you're bringing a manager in the summer to assess the squad, to maybe make changes, maybe see who he wants to keep, doesn't want to keep. Then you're right into European qualifiers, whether that's Champions League or Europa League, wherever we're going to be. So to do it this summer is the wrong summer to actually do it. If you're bringing in a manager and he's not going to be into the summer, he's got to have the tapes of Celtic this season before the end of the season. He's got to know himself that he's coming. Either he's leaving his own job or he's having a sabbatical at this precise moment in time, but knowing full well he's going to start his job on the 1st of June, whenever it is. It's a very, very tough summer to make the wholesale changes player-wise that we want, because there's no time. There's absolutely
no, right.
If we're lucky enough to finish second, I can't actually believe I'm saying that, but if we're lucky enough to finish second, then you're writing off Champions League qualifiers.
Yep.
We're bringing in a new manager. You're writing them off. Leaving a new manager to the summer.
And I think as well, it's almost verging on wishful thinking that we would have someone who's at another club already lined up to take over the summer and be that organised. I can't envisage it being that well set up and that well pre-planned. I almost feel like they're kind of just going day to day right now and winging it and hoping that if we can pick up the win against Hamilton midweek and then the end of the January comes and they'll say, oh, there's no point in changing the manager after January because the window is shut. But I mean, imagine if we were to get no points midweek. I mean, the Lenny's got to go calls that only ramp up even further, and maybe that spurs on a decision. But again, you wouldn't feel that if it did spur on an earlier decision, it's one they already had as part of a contingency plan. Would they maybe need to throw another gamble out there because they've not done their homework? It is concerning, that aspect to it.
For me, if you're bringing in a manager just now, you're saying to him, look, we've spent X amount in the summer there. We reckon we've got a decent squad. The current man's not getting a tune out of them. We want you to review the squad from now to the end of the season. We didn't want you to bring anybody in January. That's no a pressure for you to bring anybody in January. And we'll make it quite clear you're here to actually review the squad before going into next season. You've got 4 months. 4 months competitive football to review the squad. Mm-hmm. On you go. But we reckon there's a decent squad there.
Now, what Russell said as well, talking about the benefits other than the obvious of bringing in a high calibre manager. The other one, of course, Russell, is what we've seen when Brendan Rodgers eventually went to Leicester is, they go elsewhere, you get compensation if you've been cute enough to get them on a decent contract. And Celtic made money off of Brendan Rodgers, £9 million off the management team. So, yeah, there's so many benefits. It beggars belief that we're actually sitting here, in my opinion, thinking, well, Neil Lennon see out the season. I'm going to throw a few of these comments at you guys as well. Stephen Kenneth is watching on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Stephen. Chelsea ruthless in sacking one of their own. If only the Celtic board had shown similar decisiveness months ago, will it finally be this week? Kevin and I spoke about this over the weekend, and we're looking back to see if there's any signs previously that we can call upon. And the one example I was using was going back to the days of Fergus McCann, and whereby he realised in his mind that he couldn't have a Celtic man in charge of Celtic. It got to that point where he thought he needed someone who didn't have that emotional attachment to Celtic. And I think when you're growing up, the first manager that managed Celtic having not played for the club was Liam Brady in the early 90s. So, we were over 100 years old before that happened, So, in terms of traditions, it's a traditional thing that Celtic managers played for the club. And then since then, we've had some players who have played for the club, such as the aforementioned Tommy Burns, Tony Mowbray, Neil Lennon. But I think we're at a stage now, in terms of the modern game, where that can no longer be a kind of prerequisite for the Celtic job. Kevin, how do you feel about that? I mean, do you even see that as a change in direction? We've gone down the route of bringing in someone like Ronnie Dyler, for example, who was meant to be a long-term project and developing not just the first 11 guys on the park, but developing a culture at the club that would run from the youth teams right through to the first team. Do you think Celtic are in a position where this big restructure that has been kind of mooted in the summer is something that, as you say, we might do, but we need to start putting the blocks in place now? There's no point, even with all the other circumstances you mentioned in relation to a pre-season which is short enough, but it's going to be eaten into even more than normal before the qualifiers coming in. I mean, it's unthinkable for me that we would just go as is and maintain the status quo, but with every passing day, it's looking more and more likely. When it comes down to that point, and I'm going to throw a suggestion at you, Kevin, the names of Mark Hughes and Mark Bowen have been mentioned quite a lot on this podcast because I'm interested in this whole idea around perception. So you say a name and then people scoff. You say a name and people cheer. And I've seen quite a lot, even in the last few days, people coming in, Slaven Bilic. Tell me why. Tell me why on earth we would bring Slaven Bilic into Celtic Football Club. Now, the same could be said for a lot of the more kind of popular names. Eddie Howe. Why would we bring him in? Well, he plays good football. Why else would we bring him in? Well, look what he done at Bournemouth. To a level, yes. To a level, he had success at Bournemouth, but he never finished in the top 10 of the EPL, and perhaps he wasn't expected to as well. But, Davy Moyes, you mentioned Davy Moyes' name 6 months ago, boo and hiss. You mention it now. A lot of it's down to perception. So when the names of, for example, Jack Ross, when Kevin says Jack Ross, almost unanimously in the comment section is no chance, we don't want that, it's a backward step, etc, etc. But there needs to be more than just this perception of that guy's not the man for Celtic. So when I hear the names of Mark Hughes and Mark Bowen, and then I dig deeper into what they've achieved in the game, and then you look at the situation, would they be happy to come in on an interim basis, Kevin? Would any management team be happy to come in on an interim basis between now and the end of the season? Because the reason I'm asking that, there was a very big hint dropped on Twitter this week by David Lowe, who we know associates or is an associate of Neil Lennon, talking about there possibly being an interim man in charge between now and the end of the season. Now, I'm going to throw this one at Kevin first. I think I know what he's going to say. Would that be a new interim management team, or would that be an interim management team from within? Because it was quite a hint to drop from David Lowe. He was having a conversation with Roger Mitchell, and there's lots of noise on Twitter, of course there is, but there's certain conversations that you take heed of, and that was one that stood out for me.
I would find for example, you've used Mark Hughes as the name. So Mark Hughes wants to come back into football. He sees 4 months at Celtic. He's not going to take 4 months at Celtic unless he's guaranteed an interview in the summer for the job. Now, he's not going to take that. With Neil Lennon, it was maybe a bit different because you could play on the heartstrings, and he would always have done it. But any manager who's a serious manager, and I didn't mean Neil Lennon's not a serious manager, but any manager who's got ambitions to move on higher in the game, somebody with a background of Mark Hughes is not going to take an interim role at Celtic in Scotland for 4 months without a guarantee he's at least getting an interview in the summer. Like it or lump it, I never want my football club to act the way that Chelsea act, where when a manager goes in, the first thing he negotiates is his payoff, because that's what Chelsea seem to do. I didn't want my club to act like that. I want my club to. We're in a tunnel just now where we can actually look longer term. The short termism of 10 in a row is now gone. Forget about it. We maybe need to get into the mindset. We need to broaden our horizons. Our mindset maybe needs to be, we need to develop a club and a culture which builds from within. And to do that may mean that Rangers win the league. If we didn't win it, Rangers are going to win the league. If we didn't win that cup, Rangers might win it. But the longer term, it might be more beneficial for us. So we've got to forget the short-term thinking and bringing in an out a club, and bringing in an interim manager who's not employed by the club at the moment, for me, it just seems folly. Because then you're just making the same mistake that you made with Neil Lennon.
Were you surprised when you seen the comment being made by David?
I didn't take it the same way as what you took it. I took it to mean that Neil knows that he's not going to see out this week, and there is going to be another interim manager, which is likely to be John Kennedy or somebody from...
I was just waiting for you to say that. I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to say that.
Basically, Neil knows he's like a seagull that's been hit with a car. He's just waiting to get picked up off the road. You couldn't have... For me, Neil Lennon wouldn't sit there for 4 months knowing full well that he was leaving in the summer. That's the lamest of the lamest ducks that you'll ever get.
But I don't think he would do that from his own professional standpoint, Kevin. He wouldn't accept that, would he? Knowing that he's going to be paid off at the end of the season. Why would he go in, day in, day out, under that intense scrutiny, that intense pressure, and put himself through that for 4 months? Regardless of how much he loves the club and how much the club means to him, I don't think he could afford to put himself under that kind of level of stress for the next 4 months.
Look at it from a player's point of view. A player that's not going to do anything for the player's state of mind, knowing full well they've got a man in the dugout telling them to do stuff, trying to develop them or attempting to develop them on the training field when he's not going to be there 4 months later. For their long-term progression, that's no good for the club. And He can do it certain ways, and I reckon we've drawn this out far too long. And I'm now beginning to actually feel sorry for Neil. I actually felt sorry for him in October when the decision should have been made, but now it's just untenable, and it's really bad management. But the management, or the lack of management, the lack of people putting on big boy pants, doesn't surprise me anymore.
The thing with that, Kevin, and I think it's an important point that you made, is that it's not fair on the manager, because had a decision been made, and I think a lot of people wanted a decision to be made long before the Rangers game on the 2nd of January, then Neil Lennon wouldn't have had to have suffered the fallout of Dubai. He wouldn't have had to be put in front of the cameras last Monday, because I don't think that helped him one iota, in relation to how he's feeling day to day. So I think you're right, and you then ask yourself, what happens if and when something else really controversial happens, and there's a press conference on the Monday or on a Thursday or the pre-match. What happens then? Do you just stop putting Neil Lennon out there? Because we're in that situation where it seems to be, and we brought it up kind of early on, Kevin, where you'd be expecting your number 2 to say, no, actually, Neil, I've got this. You stay in the changing room. We've seen it once. I think that was probably connected to the fact that there was a COVID outbreak that we didn't know about. There was a lot of stuff happening in the background at that time. John Kennedy comes out, thought it came across okay. Thought it came across pretty well. Why has he not done it before? Gavin Strachan was able to speak for the 2 games he was in charge. Why has he not done it before? So yes, I've been very critical of Neil Lennon, but not to the point where I can't see some of the things that other people are doing wrong, because they should be supporting Neil Lennon, shouldn't they? I'm going to come back to yourself then on that point, Russell, because Kevin brought up John Kennedy, and I knew he would, as the interim boss, because it is a possibility, let's be honest. If that happens, and you've got John Kennedy, Gavin Strachan and Stevie Woods, maybe supplemented by one other, I would guess maybe Stevie McManus would make an appearance. Do you think anything would change? Would you get any kind of reaction? Because it's a bit same old. You're moving out the gaffer, but everybody else remains the same. Would that make any difference to the team?
I mean, from the team's point of view, whether John Kennedy's maybe there, I don't know if he's maybe got quite a better connection, because he was already obviously part of the coaching setup under Rodgers, and I'm not sure if there's much chemistry between John Kennedy and Neil Lennon as is. And you might actually find that if Neil Lennon was removed, I'm not pining for this in any way, shape or form, by the way, but I mean, if Kennedy was to go in, you might actually see a reaction from the players. I think they perhaps buy into his methodology, easy for me to say. But I think they might buy into that more than what they do Neil Lennon. I actually feel for Neil Lennon. I get what you're saying. You feel sorry for him in a way, and I think you're saying he wouldn't stay 4 months if he knew he was leaving at the end. But if you'd asked me before he took out this deal, he wouldn't have had a coaching setup that he didn't choose. I would never have had Neil Lennon doing that, and yet he has. So would he stay for the 4 months remaining for the rest of the season? Perhaps, like Kev said again, that he doesn't think he'll get another job in football. Well, if that's the case, why on earth would you walk away early? You would just put your pride on the shelf and take your final 4 months of a contract being paid to you. But in answer to your question, firstly, could I see John Kennedy going in? Yes, I could. Do I see it at any point in any form of interim manager, whether it's external or promoting from within? No, I don't. But I think Kennedy could get some sort of more positive reaction from the players. He's not going to get it any worse than what he's going right now, is it? I mean, right now I think it would be the best for all concerned if Neil Lennon did leave, and that includes the players. So, yeah, there's a bit of positivity if it was to be Kennedy running it, but I don't see any great change here. I'm quite convinced Celtic finish second now, no matter what. I'm not convinced the Scottish Cup will go ahead. I don't think there's any need for that to go ahead in the COVID times. So if we all know we're going to finish second, then any change that's getting made should be a permanent one, and with as much time to build for next season as possible. I don't understand what the hold up in that is.
You've also got the factor here, if you're bringing in somebody like Mark Hughes for an interim basis, it's another cost. Yeah. It's an outside cost that when you're trying to plan for a massive rebuild that we don't really need to take, because Kennedy is there. So it's an interim manager. An interim manager's an interim manager. I mean, the biggest fear you would be that Kennedy takes us on an unbeaten run for now to the end of the season. We lose the league by 2 points and he gets the job in the summer. like Spud for Train Spotting. He didn't want to try too hard, did he? Or you might end up getting the job.
Might end up getting a job. Zinkovic, but Kevin, let's be honest, we don't know if he's capable of that. I mean, again, let's go back to the word I used, perception. We have a perception of John Kennedy. I mean, that perception could be wildly incorrect, wildly inaccurate. You know, if he got the reins, who knows what might happen. I'm not jumping on that bandwagon just yet, Kev, but an interesting thought that you brought to my mind there. Rafa is the spark we need, says Zinkovic on YouTube. We need a big name. Simple. The fans won't accept a Jack Ross. I remember thinking back, I think probably before he even went to Sunderland, we spoke about Jack Ross. It might have been whilst he was down in Sunderland, and the potential that he had. I always kind of saw him maybe even in the future at some point as a future Scotland manager, Kevin, and we've spoke about Jack Ross time and time again. I don't think his career's gone in a path where I see Celtic as being a destination for him, because he's not won anything. He doesn't have the European experience, and he hasn't managed at a club where every single game is a must win. And people might say, well, you know, there's loads of managers like that. I think that's what, you know, Brendan Rodgers had that in his locker when he came in, and his last job had been at Liverpool, where I think certainly the fans expect every game to be won, because they're coming from an era maybe in the past where they were the dominant force in English and European football, and they wanted to get back to that. So that was slightly different. But if you bring in a manager who has played for the club, and obviously more often than not that has happened, they know the mentality, that winning mentality, that, you know, no matter what age group you're representing at Celtic Football Club, you must win every single game. And there's been so many players in the past who have never been able to get their heads around that, you know, from Scotland and further afield, where they can't make that step up, where a draw isn't acceptable in Scottish football. Every single game has to be won. Jack Ross hasn't had that. You know, and he's never had that even as a player. He's never played for a club who had that mentality. And I think he'd be on profile, because loads of managers go away and develop that elsewhere, having not had a great playing career. Jack Ross hasn't developed that anywhere. So I get what Zinkovic is saying. A big name. I would much rather, you know, when you're looking at the credible aspects of a manager's CV, what did Rafa Benitez do as a player? You know, questionable. I'd need to look at that. I don't know. He certainly doesn't strike me as being a star player who became a manager. Mourinho's the same. Lampard was a fantastic player. He knew the mentality down at Chelsea. I use him as an example because we've already spoken about him. So I can see why that would progress him from being a budding candidate to becoming a manager at the top level. Jack Ross, I don't see that at Celtic. I don't think he's done enough. And I mean, this season alone, Russell, you look at the two cups. He's got two semi-finals. He's got opportunities to get his club into a final, and he's failed. So we don't need a manager, regardless of how big the name is, we don't need a manager who really hasn't achieved success.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that then puts you into looking for a certain niche manager, a certain level, which right now I'm just a wee bit concerned that we've got the foresight to be looking at, or even, you know, for want of a better word, the balls to be looking at some of these managers. I think that's the thing. We need to be entering, and we need to at least join the discussion with some of these guys. You know what I mean? Yeah, you might get pied off, and they might not be interested in the slightest. But we need to have the ambition to look, you know, for someone that's going to galvanise the whole support. And I think, like you were touched on with Brendan Rodgers, we all know what he did when he came in. It did work. The club smashed 100 million turnover, as well as all the trophies, all the domestic success, and 2 out of 3 Champions League qualifications as well, which is where the club should be striving to be at. I don't see any benefit of, as I say, waiting just now. And if they have, you know, made these pre-planning moves that would really surprise me, and it does turn out to be a Jack Ross, then I'm in completely agreement with the person who's put in the comments. I don't think that is the answer at all. It's trying to get a manager though with maybe experience of winning trophies, Paul. I mean, they're either already at a club or they're in demand. And are we going to be quick enough out the traps to be in the running for these sort of managers? And like I say, I mean, the second you've seen the news about Benitez coming out of China, I appreciate the news stories were only about a fake letter, but that shouldn't be preventing us getting in touch nonetheless and finding out what's the score here. Are you looking to manage in Europe? What sort of package would it take to attract him? And if he was on £50,000, £60,000 a week at Celtic, I can't think of one supporter that would take umbrage with that or have any issue whatsoever. So yes, whilst it might not be Rafa Benitez, there has to be managers of that ilk that we're looking at definitely going forward and willing to spend the money on.
Now, Robert Highland has joined us again on YouTube. The board seem to have given up on the Champions League qualifiers as well. Players need to be sold to fund new recruits. No time left. Now, I tend to agree with Russell in relation to the fact that with the squad we have, as poorly managed or coached as they have been this season, I still think that we are by far and away at least the second best team in Scotland, I would hope. So I agree with you, Russell. I don't think there is an issue there. That would include, involve another kind of capitulation, Kevin, and the same vein as 2 wins in 12 before one of the Aberdeen or Hibs are starting to breathe down your neck and leapfrog you. But I do agree that we need to start looking ahead to the summer, and we need to get someone in just now. But taking up Robert's point there in terms of players being sold, all the chat is coming back round to Odsonne Edouard again. How much truth is in it? We're seeing clubs such as West Ham, Spurs and even Arsenal being quoted as being interested in Eddie. Going back to the point Kevin made, I think part of the rebuilding job will be that some of your prized assets will be sold. So let's have a look at Edouard, and let's also look at the possibility that Brendan Rodgers might also have his eye on one or two players. We know how big a fan he has been of Callum McGregor and the fact that he did try and prize him away from Celtic previously. I'm not expecting much incomings, if any, Kevin, even though I think we're desperate for a centre-half, at least one centre-half. Do you think in this transfer window we will see a couple of departures?
I don't think so. I think unless it's for really, really silly money, money that we can't knock back, I can't see any departures, mainly because I don't think clubs are going to spend silly money. Even your West Ham or teams of that ilk, if they get relegated, this is an awful season to get relegated, to go down into the Championship with a drop in income with no fans, the COVID stuff like that. So for them to spend what for me would be a silly amount of money on a player, an unproven player at that level. I can't see them done it. This season is completely different. This season is more a contractual obligation rather than a sporting merit season. So I can't see anybody leaving for the fees that we would want. The summer's different. The summer will be different, and we'll need to cut our cloth in the summer like other clubs, and the fees that we'll get will reflect that.
Now, there's, as always, really interesting comments coming in. Michael the Boy on Twitter: Celtic as a club have a duty to the fans to at least approach the likes of Rafa Benitez or Eddie Howe. This goes back to a point I think Tony Haggerty made just at the end of last week there, where he says you pick your top candidate and you ask the question, and then you start working back from there. And I think that is what you've been alluding to as well, Russell. Why not find out what their aspirations are and then take it from there? How disappointing is it to yourself that we as a football club maybe feel that all these managers are we'd be punching above our kind of level to get them?
Yeah, that totally, you've just hit the nail on the head. I think there is almost a lack of self-belief in that way, and a lack of awareness of how big the Celtic job can be. I mean, it was only in your weekend pod with Kev, you were talking about Bobby Robson in the 90s potentially coming to the club, and you think where we were then, okay, it's been a terrible season this year, but you would look, it was only a couple of years ago you had Brendan Rodgers in charge in the Champions League, as I say, 2 3 years, so we're not miles away. It's not like it's going to be, we're going to be miles and miles from being able to get us up to being a Champions League club again. I also get a bit concerned that they don't like having these conversations with guys who have big ambitions, because they don't have that conviction that we can fulfil those ambitions. And when it comes to going from Champions League regulars to that next stage, being Champions League 3 out of 4 seasons, perhaps 4 out of 5, get more regular, they panic a wee bit. And they seem to want to then sort of just pull in the reins a wee bit again. And if they get a really progressive, forward-thinking, ambitious manager, is that going to make them wet the bed a wee bit too much once he starts saying, right, 2 group stages of the Champions Leagues in a row, now I want X amount of million and we'll go for the last 16. Do you know what I mean? And things like that. They don't perhaps like those conversations, and they maybe prefer spending less and just getting the odd wee Champions League bonus money coming in, and it's bonus money. Whereas a Rafa Benitez would be saying, oh no, if you let me come up with my plans, my ideas, that'll be your regular money. And it'll be bonus money, it'll be qualifying out the group stage. And I'm not quite convinced under the current stewardship that's, I don't know, it just seems a bit big for them, that sort of thinking.
What Russell actually says probably bears out when you look at the facts, that we were looking to get into the Champions League. What was it, 3 out of 5 years? 2 out of 5 years? That was in the business plan. It also backs itself out when Rangers were promoted in Rodgers' first season. I remember the outcry when they started charging £49 for a ticket. And I was in a meeting, and I'm not going to talk out of turn here. And this was brung back to me. A guy who'll be watching brung this back up at the meeting I was at on Thursday night. And I remember what Peter Lawwell says. And when he says, we're going to charge you £49, it's not included on the family enclosure ticket. It's not included on the under 13 ticket. If you want to upgrade your ticket, you've got to pay £49. And we says, well, we think that's completely unfair. We're there to see Celtic. And he says, there'll be guys out there who'll pay £49 to see Celtic play Rangers. So just move on. And that maybe shows you the business model. Mm-hmm. That maybe shows you the whole business model. It was always there to get the business of the old firm back into town to sell 8,000-9,000 £49 tickets. At that point, to say to a season ticket holder, we don't care if you didn't pay it, because we'll get somebody else in to pay that £49. And maybe that shows you the mindset of a wide section of your support.
Wow. I mean, I only know from my point of view. I mean, for me, I think, Rangers were always going to come back up to the top league anyway. At some point, it was inevitable. That I know it took them one extra season, but what are you even worried about that for? Do you know what I mean? That shouldn't be coming into it, because they were always going to be back in that league eventually in some sort of form.
Actually, I put my hand up there because something else has just came back to me for that meeting. What was actually says. Somebody says about a Rangers challenge, and the top table actually says, well, with the size of support and the finance available to them, they will challenge us eventually. That was a comment for Peter Lawwell as well.
Yeah.
So they were always expecting it, or they were always preparing for it.
I mean, it was just common sense, wasn't it? I mean, if they were still getting 50,000 fans at their ground, they were always going to come back into the league and end up being some form of challenge. It was all about us, though, how much of a challenge we let them become. And instead of being stamping on them when they were down, we obviously let them back in. But what should have been happening throughout that was tuning fans into, whilst they weren't in the leagues, was the Champions League every year. And getting that to be the product and that to be the type of games that we were the most psyched up for. Instead of waiting patiently on your noisy neighbours to come back in and make that the key selling point to fans being the Celtic Rangers thing, that would have took care of itself. But during the time when they were away, because I know you said over the pod at the weekend as well, we almost had a free run at the Champions League during that time, and we only qualified, X amount of times. I can't remember, 2, maybe 3. I mean, if we had made the Champions League a regular thing by showing that ambition. Imagine that for the younger fans coming through, being what they associate Celtic with, competing at European level. And then the Rangers thing being the second biggest aspect of, of types of matches that we can play in. But instead, I think you're absolutely right. It looks like we focused on the domestic rivalry ahead of the European one, which makes no business sense whatsoever, because the European one is the one that really is the goldmine. And you only need to look, this is a wee bit off tangent, but I've seen Club Brugge signed a player for €20 million in this month. And you just think, they're not in a league that's much bigger than ours. They certainly aren't as big a club as Celtic. And yet, if we were even remotely talking about signing a player for €20 million, we'd all fall off our chairs. So that just shows you what can happen when you get in the Champions League more regularly. And like I say, that should be our key selling point for tickets, for fans coming through. Not this domestic rivalry we've allowed to become so prevalent all over again.
But you're right. You're right, Russell. It was absolutely spot on, 100% there. It's been short-termism from the board.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
the Champions League, we had a free run at the Champions League, and if we had looked bigger out our wee parochial island and says Europe's where it's going to be, you make more money in Europe than what you do for winning the Scottish League. You make more money in the Champions League for having a close Scottish League title. It's for me. I think when I look back on this, I'm already over losing the league this year. And what are we at the 25th of January? I'm over losing the league this year already. Yeah. And for me, when I look back on this, which I will look back on it, the 10 in a row has throttled us. 10 in a row has actually, we've had a short-term vision, and it's been to get to the 10. And that's wrong, and that's actually, we're in a dungeon now, actually, with a noose round our neck.
Why does it have to be one or the other? Why? I can't understand that logic either. Both
of them went hand in hand. If we would have aimed for Europe, 10 would have been a given.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, only on a Celtic State of Mind could you be talking about dungeons and seagulls all in the one show, Kevin, so thanks for that. Interestingly enough, quite a few comments coming in relation to Mark Hughes, and I make Mark Hughes as a point on the whole perception of the minute a manager's name getting mentioned, we get it scoffed at. Just about any manager, and it gets scoffed at because no chance, he's yesterday's man, or Jack Ross, he's no good enough, and I've done it myself with some of them, or Ralph Rangnick, no chance, he wouldn't come to Celtic. So I haven't seen a universal list of names that everybody's saying, oh, actually that would work. And I think when you actually dig in a wee bit deeper and you start looking at the managerial stats, and I've gone over them a few times. Des Brennan says, I see Mark Hughes on a TV this weekend. Yeah, it does look as though he wants back in the game. Come on, the Hoops Celtic, who were involved in our charity weekend, are welcome to the show, guys. I would take Mark Hughes, and Benny 121, I take Hughes also. Now, this isn't based simply on his pedigree as a player. We know what he did as a player with Manchester United and Chelsea, Bayern Munich, Barcelona and Wales. But in terms of his managerial career, I see things popping up on Twitter. Mark Hughes is a serial loser. No, he's not. He's actually not. That's factually incorrect. He didn't have a very good time at Southampton, to be fair, which was his last job. Has he had opportunities in the last 2 years to get back into football? I would suggest that he will have had. He will have had opportunities. Of course he does. And then I would then bring in the Davy Moyes example, whereby 6 months ago his name would have been scoffed at. Today it wouldn't. Now, he's not all of a sudden become a good manager in 6 months. He was always that manager. And was he not out of the game for a couple of years between jobs? So I just think that when we're moving into the next managerial appointment, whenever that may be, because it's going to happen eventually, there's going to be a lot of disappointed Celtic supporters. But what will happen is we just need to galvanise, don't we? We need to galvanise because we need to get the squad ready for next season, which hopefully will include Champions League qualifiers. So, that's for me the difficulty in amongst all the chaos and all the noise, Kevin, is the fact that you've got to actually look at every single candidate and you've got to look at their value as managers and what they've actually done, and just don't base it on perception. So if I say to you about Jack Ross, it's not just because I don't like him, because I do like him, and I like the fact that he's got a good coaching team as well. I mean, I've got huge respect for Jack Ross and John Potter, his assistant, but in terms of taking over at Celtic, I don't think the time is right. If he goes away on a tremendous run, wins a few cups with Hibs, he'll get a move back down south. He might then make a name for himself, and Celtic might not be in the running in terms of his own career path. I then see other names coming into the frame. I've seen them all, to be honest with you. Roy Keane, I can't understand why Roy Keane would be mentioned in the same breath, because as a manager, he shouldn't even be a candidate. And that's us going back to that, they need to know the club. Do they really? Or do they need to know how to actually shape a team? Do they need to know how to coach a team and manage a game through to fruition? Because you don't need to have had an association with Celtic for that to be a success. The big perception thing is something I'm going to keep coming back to. Kevin, for example, if I was to make an approach to someone like Mark Hughes to come on this podcast, would you welcome that for a chat and a discussion about his view on his career and his future?
I would love it. I would love to actually speak to him as well regarding the managerial merry-go-round, how it works, what happens, the ins and outs, the stuff that we don't see. And also, it would be interesting to hear his thoughts on his philosophy, because there's certain teams. If you go to Stoke have got a certain philosophy. You go to Southampton, they've got a certain philosophy. They've got a certain aim. Stoke and Southampton is to stay in the English Premier League. So, Ralph Husentattle's actually doing quite well with Southampton. Just I don't think that's how you say his name, but we'll let that pass. So it'd be interesting to hear what his philosophy would be if he took a club who predominantly dominates the ball in games. So, he's been Man City manager. A lot of people forget he's been Man City's manager. So, at the moment, I would take Yosser Hughes if he could actually teach us how to defend a corner kick and develop talent for Lennox Town. But it would be interesting to hear him on, not to punt himself for the job, but just to hear what his take is on his image.
I raise the point, Kevin, because he obviously has, and it's been mentioned in the comments, he has been in the media recently. I think that there comes a point, but due to the strain and the pressure, and I'm not saying this is the case with Mark Hughes, in a manager's life where sometimes they come away from a bad experience and take some time out. And then all of a sudden people think, oh, they're yesterday's man. You say Man City, people will say to you, but he brought in Robinho. That's perception. Well, he did. Well, he was a manager when Robinho joined Man City. He also brought in Vincent Kompany. So you're going to give him credit for that as well, as maybe have a dig at Robinho. When Robinho actually was a club choice, it was the new owners that brought him in. They wanted a marquee signing. They wanted to put their stamp on it. We're going to spend a lot of millions of pounds, and we're going to actually become a force in English football again. So they went and signed Robinho. You're the manager. You're Mark Hughes. You're going to say, no thanks. 30-odd million quid for the Brazilian international. I won't bother with that. But he did bring in Kompany and various other successful players at Manchester City. So we could actually go through every single candidate and give you a list of pros and cons. But I think that the most meaningful thing from this discussion is that we've come through almost to the end of January and there's been no change. And I find that astonishing. And also, I think that the fact that we haven't strengthened, particularly at centre-half, I think that's astonishing as well. Because, what happens if we get yet another injury? What happens if we get yet another COVID casualty? We've seen it this season, so why aren't we planning against that? How well set up are we when we bring in a loan signing that we can't, change that deal midway through it? We can't send them back. I mean, and similarly, we've got Jack Hendry over in Belgium, and we can't bring him back either. So it doesn't ever seem to be in favour of the club. We've got to keep a player if he's playing badly, yet we can't bring one back if he's playing okay. So I just think the whole recruitment process definitely is something that we need to look at and completely review. Now, I want to take some time to speak about Johannes Edvaldsson. Rest in peace, Shuggy. That comes in from Martin Bickett, and there has been quite a few other messages coming in about a man who was part of the team when 10 men won the league. Kevin Graham. You won't remember that, I don't think. You'd have only been 3 or 4 at that time, but it's one of these stories that's part of Celtic folklore, whereby we won in the last game of our season the league by beating Rangers 4-2. We had to win that game, and that was despite Johnny Doyle getting sent off for having a wee fly kick at Alex McDonald as he was on the deck. 4-2, one of the most famous victories in Celtic's history. Big Shuggy was part of that. He was an Icelandic internationalist. His son, in actual fact, was a coach. I think he was involved at Celtic at some point. He certainly was involved with the Jimmy Johnstone Academy. I heard loads of great stories about Big Shuggy through Andy Lynch when I was writing Andy's book. Andy loved Shuggy to death, and Shuggy got into the pub game after his career at Celtic finished, etc. So, yeah, rest in peace, and our thoughts and prayers are with his friends and family at this time as well. It's not a player, unfortunately, that I ever had a chance to speak to, but he's in there. He's in the Celtic history books. The last thing I'd like to discuss with you is some of the comments that are coming in from people at the club. People saying that the fans have got short memories in relation to, success in the past. And it's almost as if, Russell, it's almost like, be grateful for what happened last season. Only a month ago we won a quadruple treble. As if that masks the poor performances and all the bad decisions that have been made this season. As a supporter, I find it ill-timed when someone from Celtic says such a thing.
I don't understand it at all. I don't understand that logic. The only reason you'll ever hear negative vibes from Celtic supporters about what's currently going on is because we all want the best for Celtic. Surely that's the common goal. And that's got to be something that is a continual thing, not wasn't it great when we did that and now we'll just go, not win anything for a few years. No, you have to be constantly challenging yourself, and you have to be obviously challenging the club. And we do it through this sort of stream. I'm lucky enough to do it once a week. But anything you ever hear on this is very constructive. It's always with the sole purpose of Celtic being the best version that Celtic can be. I don't understand how that makes you ungrateful, having a short memory. Maybe having a short memory is a good thing because we know what it's like to win these trophies. All we want to do is do that again. What is the problem here? A short-term memory, I think we back up a lot right now based on facts as well. Based on, you're looking back, I've heard you on this pod talking about 20 years ago when there was management changes, talking about Martin O'Neill's time at the club. You went further back than that in the past. John Barnes has been the conversation recently. This isn't talking about just short-term memories and things like that. We're making contrasting and comparing to various eras of Celtic with the common goal of wanting what's best for Celtic going forward. What is the problem?
No, you're right. Now, there's going to be massive changes, Russell, all over the game, all over the Scottish game, for obvious reasons during the pandemic. But this managerial merry-go-round, we've seen it kicking off down in England, Kevin Graham. And I think we've talked about managerial stock rising and diminishing and all this kind of stuff. What obviously does happen at the moment is we've got a manager who, whenever that time comes, I think he's going to be one of these guys who will take some time away from football altogether. I don't think that you and I realise, Kevin, that the level of pressure somebody like Neil Lennon is under. But when we're talking about looking back, the one period of the most recent history that I do go back to was just prior to us winning the first of the 9 in a row. And, Rangers had won 3 league trophies on the bounce. And the 3 seasons, as I remember them, was Gordon Strachan's last season, Mowbray's season, and then Lenny's first season. There's 3 in a row. Now, if you don't get your finger out, you don't get your act together, it's easy enough for something like that to happen, whereby you bring in the wrong man, you've got to change him again, you're then bringing in an interim. And in the meantime, who's going to win the league? If it's not Celtic, well, Rangers are going to win the league. Of course they are. So we're entering a period now, Kevin, where you're saying you're over the disappointment, I guess, of not winning the league this season. But the club need to act to prevent us going into this situation where that pendulum swings in the other direction and it stays there for a few seasons. Do you think that the changes we're going to make will be with that in mind for immediate results, Kevin Graham?
A couple of things before I answer the question, Paul. Big Shuggy, Foxtay's family, and that we talk about cult heroes quite a bit. He's a cult hero, eh? He's a Celtic cult hero, eh? Because he played in a time when there wasn't many, no like today, when there's loads of foreigners playing in Scottish football, eh? So I reckon Big Shuggy's a Celtic cult hero, and even just for a part in that 10 men won the league. You mentioned Lee Griffiths' comments there as well. Maybe Lee should actually have a look in the mirror and see if he's been grateful to his employers who have stuck by him. Has he been grateful to the manager and his employers this season when he came back unfit? And his employers have stood by him. Many managers have stood by him as well when other clubs would have kicked him out. Has he done enough this season to make it better? We talk about history quite a bit on this podcast because we didn't actually want to repeat the same mistakes of history, and we do keep on repeating those mistakes. For me, I could take losing the league title next season as long as we look longer term, as long as we broaden our horizon. And for me, to make the same mistake that we done with Neil Lennon, because we were that focused on something parochial, to try and change it as quickly right away next season would be the wrong decision for me. We've got to broaden our horizons. We've got to look at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is outside Scotland. If you get the bigger picture right, your domestic game sorts itself out as well. So I wouldn't want to just make a change so we can win a domestic title back next season. I want to make a domestic change so we can win the 5 after that. We can get to the last 16 of the Champions League. We can be involved in a European League. We can get to the last 16, last 8 of Europa League. That's where I want to make the change. Because if you make that change, the domestic game handles itself.
I agree with that. Now, last message coming in from Highland Paddy 2 via YouTube. I was born on the day 10 men won the league. Well, good for you, sir. Great day to be born. And, you know, if you are watching on YouTube, as Highland Paddy is, remember to subscribe. We're growing all the time. We're putting out as many broadcasts as we possibly can. It's been great to start off the week with another Axon Bulletin. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30. And all that's left for me to say today is Kevin Graham and Russell Boyce. Thank you again for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.